or have
Awesome.
a great
Are you curious about bodies, pleasure, and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out of this world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here is the host of The Pleasure Zone, sex, relationship, and intimacy coach and holistic health practitioner, Milica Jelenic.
Welcome, my sweet pleasure seekers. What a fine evening we have this evening. If you're joining me live tonight, we are rounding up 2024. Well, not completely. We've got one more episode left of 2024 after this one, but we are rounding up the year. And I thought, what a better way to round up the year than looking at a whole bunch of topics that will help us move into the new year with a lot more fun. And one of those topics is about kink, because I love to talk about kink exploration. I love to explore kink. And I just thought, well, let's bring this up. Not only that, it's also because in my practice as a sex and intimacy coach, I find that I have people quite often coming in, couples coming in, looking to kind of try and find a way to reconnect with each other, trying to spice it up. And whether they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, yes, I have had sex and intimacy coaches coaching with somebody in their 90s. Um, it does happen. You can find that there's always a little something that you can invite somebody to just kind of come out of their shell just a little bit, to be able to invite them to try and explore things that maybe they've secretly been interested in, but they haven't had the courage to say or do anything about it. So maybe now in this upcoming year is a great time to do that. I think it's going to be a great time to do that. So we are moving into a year that, like, I'm looking at numerologically, the last year we were in was a number 8, like if we're looking at numerologically. And to me, that's all about breaking old karmic patterns and habits. And we're moving into like a 9 numerologically, which, and I guess other people look at it in different ways, but I'm going to look at it as 2025. So adding those numbers up into a 9. And to me, that's about really finding out who you are, the individual, getting into the hermit energy. And what does that mean to be the hermit, to be able to self explore, to find out what's important to you, and then bring that out to the world, bring it out to your relationships. So, one of the ways to do that is through finding out more about you and being able to utilize that to spice up your relationship, your sex life. So, aside from talking about sex and intimacy in my practice, also what I do is I work with people for uh, through my holistic health practice. So, I do different things with that, whether it's radionics or somatic movement, energy work. I don't even know. If I actually had my papers on the wall, it would look like wallpaper. So, I don't bother putting my papers on the wall because most people who show up know me, have listened to me, have either been recommended to me by word of mouth, or they find me, and they find me because they connect with me. So whether my papers are up there or they're not, doesn't really matter. That's for those of you watching and wondering, where are her papers in the background? They're in a file folder, actually. So so let's talk a bit about why on earth would we want to explore kink? Isn't kink scary? Isn't kink for those far out people? Like kink is for the that kind of fringe of society. Kink is for those people who they just can't relate to others, right? I know that a lot of people, when you say the word kink, they don't know what it is. And if you say something like, fetish. They might understand that a little bit, but then still they're not really totally sure. So when we look at kinks and fetishes and all those sort of things, why is it that we have, decided that that's for the fringe of society when in reality, you probably have a little naughty side of yourself that's a little bit kinky and you might not even realized it. You might have been living it your whole life and not even realized it. You might have been like, hey, I really like to be spanked, but you never thought of it as kinky. And maybe it's like you've always liked to be spanked and you like to be spanked in a certain way. You might like public humiliation spankings. You might like privately being spanked until your bottom turns red or you have like bruises left behind. Who knows? Either way, as long as it's consensual with people who are of the age of consent, I say yes. So part of consent to me means by definition that this is being done with people who are of the age of consent, whatever that equals in your area. I would say 18 plus is the general age of consent. So if you're not doing that, then no, a 15-year-old cannot consent legally. So if you're a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old and you're both underage, you're doing your own thing. You go for it. That's up to you. So age of consent is important and consenting is important. If you're 15 and 17 and you're consenting, but you're not of the age of consent, that is a different conversation. So that's not our conversation for today. May I digress? And I always do digress. So, welcome to my brain. For those of you who are brand new to this show has been on for over 10 years and I tend to digress. So, if you're used to listening to me and following my crazy brain, congratulations, you're in for a roller coaster ride of fun. If you are brand new to this station, hold on tight. You are going on a roller coaster ride of ups, downs, here, there, stories that I will probably tell about myself, stories I will tell about other people, but not name names. And we are going to have fun. Because why not? Isn't life just far more enjoyable when we are having fun? So, the reason I wanted to bring this up is I'm looking at the new year and I'm thinking, what can we do to invite a whole different attitude and change some dynamics like in relationships? And one of the ways to do that is to get really frank and really honest about your desires. And a lot of times those things that maybe haven't been mentioned because they feel like they're taboos, and a lot of them are taboos because they are kinky. So, how do we invite kink into our lives? How do we have those conversations? How do we overcome shame and the stigma around kinks? How do we find the steps for figuring out what our personal fantasies are? How do we set safe and consensual boundaries? And how do we do things like create contracts and communicate and figure out how to do exploration in a way that everybody knows what's going on so there's no surprises? How do we do all that? So there are three C's that I love talking about on this show, which are and consent, curiosity, and I'm sure I'll communication. That's hilarious. Consent, curiosity, and communication. Those are three of the main C's I like to talk about. There are some other C's, but I won't be saying those four-letter words today because I don't want to get kicked off of most stations and most streaming platforms. So there's a fourth C word that's fantastic, and there are other C words as well that I do like to talk about. Uh, as well. However, those are my main three, which I bring everything back to those: curiosity, consent, and communication because they're key. So we are going to be exploring some of the things around kinks that, like, why are some of the things that we desire generally that people desire, why are they considered so taboo? Why would we want to try something that's taboo? Well, I don't know about you. If you tell a child that there's cookies in that cookie jar, but you shouldn't touch those cookies, there's an automatic interest of that. is curious? Why can't I touch those cookies in the cookie jar? Now, if we translate that into the kink world, it could be something like, now, there over there, there's a rope and there's some candle wax that's melting that's body safe, but don't touch that. And then, of course, your first curiosity is, oh, what can I do with a rope and some candle wax? Oh, the curiosity kicks in. And then, you might want to try things. So the things that are taboo are probably things that have unconsciously been put out through society, through uh, generally an unspoken thing publicly, where everybody decides that certain behaviors are maybe not acceptable. They're taboo because if you do them, you're kind of on the fringe of society. And a lot of people don't want to be on the fringe of society because it's uncomfortable. However, secretly behind doors, what they're doing is very different than what they're saying, maybe in public or around their partner. But those taboo things are usually the things that will get you the most pleasure, the most opening up, and oftentimes the most healing. So, the things you've been avoiding the most when it comes to pleasure are probably things that are going to help you heal. So, if you've been, maybe feeling shame around, I don't know, say, I'm just going to use spanking as a topic because it's a great reference and it's a common reference. So if you've been feeling shame, say, around enjoying spanking and you don't want to tell your partner you enjoy spanking, and you're like, I don't know, is there something psychologically wrong with me? Do I need to go to a psychiatrist? Is this from childhood trauma? Yada, yada. There's so many possible things. Sometimes, guys, sometimes you just like spanking and there's no psychological trauma. Sometimes there has been trauma, but the spanking will actually help you out of it if it's being facilitated by somebody who's kind, who listens, who is playing as in the role of consent and is a dom who understands what to do with the spanking. So, or if you really enjoy spanking somebody, then, you being in the position of dom listening to the sub who really needs you to pay attention to their cues and their communication. So, when we're looking at how do we engage these conversations, first we got to look at what are some of the things that you are hiding really deep inside of you that are curiosities that you've had for a really long time? What are some things that actually kind of you might think repulse you? Because sometimes those are the exact same thing that, if conducted by the correct people, can actually help you heal and relieve a lot of issues, whether it's old traumas, stresses, that sort of thing. So I would have to say that probably 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, if and earlier too, when I was younger and I'd had somebody who wanted to tie me up, I was mortified. I thought, this is violence. This is like not acceptable. Why would somebody want to be violent with me? And I really couldn't get it. Couldn't get it at all. It took a lot of education, understanding, and um, learning to be able to get the value of bondage in general and what it can do and what it can offer your body for healing, for pleasure. And prior to that, though, I would have just shook my head straight up no. And so, without knowing that it could be a healing modality, I did not ever think that I would try it. Nope, that wasn't going to happen. So, when you know that you can get something else out of it that might help you get out of the trauma of the thing that's scaring you, like if you had a lot of abuse as a child, then it might help you heal, to be able to help you get back into a position where you feel like you have more authority. Even as a sub, I know this may surprise some of you, you have a lot of authority as a sub because you are actually the one in control of the scenario and the situation. You can use your safe words through communication and stop scenarios if your dom is is actually a good dom and listens, then you are going to be safe. So you need to make sure that you've got a dom that's going to listen to you. And hopefully in partnership with your lover, they are willing to listen to you, know how to play with the safe words, and make it a lot easier. So we're going to come back and we're going to be breaking the taboos. Like, why are these things so wrong? Why? We're going to break some of these taboos, and then we're going to invite more pleasure in with kink and exploration of kink. You're listening to the Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is the Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight we are talking about busting out of, well, all those old taboos. We're going to break free from taboos. And my glasses right now, if you guys are watching video, are probably going, what? She keep touching her glasses. My glasses are wandering down my nose. And, just letting you know, I'll be touching my glasses. If that turns you on, if that's your kink, well, aren't you lucky? So we're going to be breaking taboos. We're going to be inviting more kink and kink exploration into our lives, because why not? So one of the things we first have to look at is like, what is creating all the shame and issues around choosing kink? Why have we made it so weird? Why have we made it so taboo when actually, in fact, it's quite normal, as long as, let's remember, consent, which equals age of consent, and consent, curiosity, and communication are all there. So if we have all of that happening, good to go. We need to break free from the shame, right? So a lot of the shame will come in the form of religious shame, societal shame, cultural shame. There's so many ways we've been shamed. It can be shame, even just like familial shame, like super specific to your family. You might have certain shame around things. And if you can identify that in you, like what is the thing I feel so ashamed about? So if, for example, you have a burning desire to sip on urine and you're like, it really turns me on to think about that, then if you have that, but you're also feeling a lot of shame around it, then one of the things you can do is you can get into different groups. Like you can get into things like FetLife, different kink groups, talk to other people who are experiencing that. You can also work with different sex and intimacy coaches or specific coaches for kink coaching. Generally, any of us who have got coaching under our belts for this kind of work are not going to think you're weird. we're going to work with you and we'll understand. And most of us have experienced it. So we already know to say, hey, yeah, this, tried that, done that, been there. So when you have these things come up and you feel like, I'm really ashamed of this, but it's also like a burning desire, one of the things to first do is write those things out. Maybe write them in a place where they're not going to be found, because the shame of being found out might limit you from writing it or even getting it out of your system. You might put it in somewhere in a file that's deeply hidden in your computer so nobody can ever find it. Cool. Get it out of your system, or talk to somebody who's a professional to be able to explore these ideas and find out, like, where do you actually sit on the spectrum of, is this acceptable behavior? There are things that are not acceptable because they don't involve consent. They do not involve communication, and they may involve curiosity, but there's no consent or communication going on. So, like, I'm not okay with having sex with dead bodies because they can't give consent. If somebody gave you consent before they died, maybe in their will to give you their body, I suppose there's a gray area there. But there are certain things where if you can't give consent and if you can't communicate, then I'd say no, that's not going to be acceptable. So I know I had to bring up the really weird one. I had to, because people will bring up those ones and, like, well, actually, no, because the person cannot consent. And, peeping Tom stuff, right? If you're watching somebody get dressed and they don't know it and there's no consent, I'm not okay with that. So voyeurism can be like that. But if the people who are being watched are aware of it, like if you've put porn out on the internet and you've put the porn out, that's different than somebody videotaping you without your consent and putting it out. Then there's no consent. So that's not acceptable. Do you kind of get where I'm coming from? So we need that consent. So when it comes to shame, a lot of times there's been shame because there has been a time at some point in your life where something has maybe happened and there's been no consent or communication. So we need to take back the power, your internal power, your strength, and be able to feel confident and empowered in your sexuality, in your choices, and in what you are doing, whatever kind of kink it happens to be. So let's make sure you're safe, and let's look at all the things that you feel are shameful and find out, where do they come from? Is that a parent's voice, a grandparent's voice, a teacher's voice, an ex-partner's voice? Whose voice is telling you these things that make you feel like you have shame? So I have to say, I had shame from all kinds of voices in my head for a very long time. And had I not been able to work through the shame and identify it, find out whose voices they were, and do I actually agree with those values? When I realized I didn't actually agree with those values and they were somebody else's values, I could start to unravel them and find out who I was out, like, underneath all of that. And had I not done that, I couldn't have these conversations with you guys. It would have been so embarrassing and so traumatizing just to have these conversations. So you got to work through the shame, whether you're choosing to go out there and have your own sexy podcast, or you're just choosing to go out there and have a sexy life. Either way, we need to get the shame out of the way, the shame, the blame, the guilt, all of that stuff that can distract you from finding joy and happiness in your body. So you can journal about those things that you feel shame about, talk to somebody about them, work them out, because otherwise they're going to stop you, they're going to rule you, they're going to prevent you from experiencing the things that you maybe would like to experience. And just know that as long as your kinks involve consent, communication, and curiosity from both partners, or all partners, could be 25 partners involved, it could be 100. As long as everybody's agreeing to this, you're good. You're good. And just know that if that you have a desire for something that you think is non-consensual, there is something called consensual non-consent, which is where you agree that there's like play that involves non-consent, as if you didn't consent to being spanked. I'm going to give you the mild version of that. Is like you didn't consent to being spanked, but it was actually part of the agreement and the contract before that you would play the no, 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 I don't want to be spanked game. But in fact, you're consenting to being spanked. This is where things get complex. This is why having contracts are really helpful, and understanding the rules of play are really, really helpful. So the way that we can move out of taboo is to be able to get really clear on what your desires are, move through the shame, wherever it's coming from, realize that the chances are what you're desiring is not that obscure. And there are a lot of other people out there, really highly likely that there are a lot of people out there that have kinks that also are in line with your kinks that you like as well. And some of them can be really specific. Like there are kinks that are so specific, like being turned on by flowers is a really specific kink. And it's a really cool kink because think about springtime and how erotic that is. Amazing. So there's that. And there's consent, right? So we got to make sure that everybody's safe. So one of the things to start to look at for yourself is just get some of those fantasies out, whether you're doing it through self-exploration in your mind through fantasy, whether you're writing about it, whether you're working with a therapist to confront your shame, working with kink-aware therapists, or working with sex and intimacy coaches who generally also have training in kink awareness. So if you want to talk to me, you can do that. You can also seek different communities, whether it's kink positive groups or other forums online. That's really helpful to work with people that work with and find communities that you can relate to. And then we got to find out what are those fantasies. So you might be exploring them in your mind and thinking, oh, there's shame around this and there's shame around that. Is that something that actually might turn me on? Like, I thought that I didn't like being spanked because I thought it was like awkward and only for when you're in trouble. But what if I actually really like being spanked? Maybe I could try that and see how I feel. So reflect on some of the things that do turn you on. Some of the things, ironically, look at some of the things that you've thought have turned you off too, because you might find that there's some way to turn it around where you can feel empowered, where it might not be that you want to be spanked, but you might really love the idea of spanking somebody else. So sometimes those things that really kind of turn you off, if you turn it around as in your mind too, and just see like what it would be like to deliver that same experience to somebody, you might like to deliver it more than you'd like to receive it. So with your partner, if you do have a partner, try not to judge their turn-ons either, which can be hard for somebody if you have a lot of shame. So that's why you got to work through the shame bit first, so that even when you're either solo and discovering this on your own, or whether you're with a partner, you can come to the table with less shame and not going to shame your partner either, because if you do that, the chances are that communication is going to stop. And then what will happen is that they will try if the communication stops and your partner really has a desire to try and experience some of the things, but you won't talk to them, the chances are they're going to find somebody who will, because we're creative human beings and we also have enough curiosity that leads us off in different directions. So if you can stay open and be non-judgmental towards your partner and just see and observe, and listen, you might find that they're willing to have bigger, more in-depth conversations with you, be more vulnerable with you, and then that'll open your world up. And on this show in particular, I've talked a lot about really common kinks. So if you need to go back and listen to some episodes, there's ones on urologia, which is water sports. And there's another word for it in the kink world. So anything to do with urine and different fluids. And so there's those, there's the spanking ones, there's bondage ones. Those are really common. There's in bondage in different ways, whether you're being tied to a cross, or you're being tied to the bed, or you're just being bound with beautiful ropes. Either way, you're going to find that there are a lot of different varieties of things that you can do that are really common. Blindfolding, hot wax, hot and cold play. There's food play. Those are like some of the top most common ones. Also, using different materials, wearing different clothing, dress up, and like role playing, all that sort of stuff. So look up some of the things that maybe you've heard of, and it's always good to learn a little bit about them. So whether you're listening to podcasts or reading books or checking out YouTube videos, all of that can be really, really helpful. So when we come back, we're going to keep talking about some of the steps for discovering personal fantasies for this amazing episode. Getting out of the taboos, breaking free from taboos, and inviting and the kink in. So I keep changing the topic title, but you got the gist of it. So you're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network. We'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight, we have been looking at breaking free from taboos in order to explore kink in relationships with ourselves first. I think, and foremost, it's important to know you to be able to bring more of you to a relationship. So one of the things that we're looking at is some of the steps for discovering personal fantasies. What actually turns you on? What are you curious about? And one of the ways to figure that out is to reflect on what turns you on. And if you've never been turned on in your life, that is a unique experience. Although I suppose there are people who have never been turned on in their life, if they've been in situations of like traumatic experiences, torture for their entire existence, then that's very possible that they've never experienced a turn on. That's sending my brain into a whole other dimension. So for the average person who actually has access to this show, the chances are you have had a turn on in your life. And the chances are that you've had turn on probably more than once in your life, but it may not have been in relation to another human being. You may have had just turn on by watching. Well, what I mean is like in person. So you might have just been watching a show. I was talking to somebody the other day about Dallas, and like back in the day, there was a show called Dallas. And when I was little, my dad would watch it. And it was like the very first time I remember seeing somebody kiss on TV was Dallas. And I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And was one of the two main characters. I can't remember which two, but I think it was Bobby, the brother Bobby, kissing somebody. And I remember being 100% mortified that I thought that the male character was biting the woman's face off. So, as much as that brought up a memory for me, like that's one of my first memories of a sex act. It didn't actually traumatize me in my life to the point where I never kissed anybody again. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because sometimes we see or experience things and we think we're traumatized for life. But then later on, we realize oh, it's actually not as bad as I thought it was. When I got to be a teenager and I was kissing, when I was getting kissed, I certainly wasn't thinking about my face being bitten off or going, oh, wow, uh, that wasn't so bad. So sometimes it just takes a little bit of experience, a little bit of growing to be able to try things out and not be so scared of them, like not be scared of being kissed because you think your face is going to be bitten off. Yeah. So look at some of the things maybe you've seen on TV that have turned you on, that got you aroused. And whether it's movies or costumes, sometimes you could just maybe it wasn't the show itself, or maybe it was just costumes in a show that you went, wow, that's beautiful, that's sexual, sensual, I love it, it's amazing. Um, it can be that can help you to develop ideas because maybe what you're really turned on by is clothing, and maybe you're watching different maybe it's like the flow of fabric. So again, kink can be very, very specific to the point where you could be absolutely turned on by certain fabrics, either wearing them or having them touch you. So you might not even realize that until you see a theme. And so writing and reflecting on the different things that do excite you and turn you on, you might find a theme where you're like, wow, every single time I get turned on is by a woman wearing exactly the same outfit. Or every time I get turned on, it's by a dude wearing the same type of clothing. So for me, uh, I I personally love a man in a kilt. Like even if he's got a paunch, like I don't know what it is. A man in a kilt just about does me in. So men in kilts, yay for that. Also, there was a time in like the 90s where I had a real thing for men in white pants. And I think it was because there was like a whole bunch of commercials with men walking on beaches in white pants that were like rolled up, and they had like their shirt open. They weren't like topless, but they had their shirt open. There was something so like I loved about that. So in my brain, a lot of times the fantasies that will kind of come through my brain will involve kilts, men in kilts. Um, Usually, it does help that like the show Outlander has some fabulous men in kilts. That is a very helpful reference material. But you might find that, that absolutely doesn't do it for you, but maybe something else does it for you. Maybe watching clothing that's like ever flowing long gowns does it for you. So see what turns you on. Find the theme. There's going to be a theme probably. And you can work with that theme. And there's usually an energy behind the theme as well. And there's something that you can probably figure out from there about what would turn you on. So, like if I go down the men in kilts theme, I'm thinking about like Scottish warriors and how they would be like in the Highlands, and they've got to be rough and rugged and, take into account Outlander and the character Jamie, who anytime he, you know, is like taking down his Sassenach, he is like amazingly strong and totally gentle at the same time, right? So there's something about the strength and the gentleness, like all at the same time. So, so sexy. So that kind of energy is really attractive to me, whether it's in uh, whatever body it shows up in. It's the strength and the gentleness, and geniuses, that's an additional bonus. So like watching geniuses is an amazing turn on. If I can like see people say amazing things, I'm like, wow, that was awesome. So it's not that that's necessarily a kink for me, but it's definitely part of my sexual identity, is that I'm turned on by really smart, intelligent people who are amazing at observation and who have like amazing abstract thinking. That is phenomenal for me. So you want to reflect on your turn-ons, what turns you on. And then if you're not really sure, look at those common kinks that I'd mentioned, like water sports, like uh, bondage, and uh, anything to do with impact play. So like spanking is impact play, hot and cold play, any of that sort of stuff is really common. So play with some of those and check them out, try them out. Self-exploration is really good too. So you can use that for your own fantasies. You can either listen to audios that will bring you through those experiences, kind of like meditations that are fantasy related meditations. So if you need some dialogue, let me know. I have created dialogue for people in the past. It just, again, needs to be consensual, even when it's dialogue. There are some things I don't get turned on by talking about, so I wouldn't do you justice. So you also might want to look at different erotic materials that work for you. So whether that's in print or on video or audio, whatever floats your boat. And then if you do happen to have a partner, remember that dialogue. Hopefully you can open the dialogue and have some conversation around these things that ends up being with no judgment, so that you can feel confident in your exploration with your partner. Because kink exploration can be really, really empowering when it's safe and when it's consensual, when there's communication and when partners know what they're doing and they have some background. So I know I've mentioned consent a million times, but consent is so important. Consent is important for all kinds of um, reasons, right? So one of the reasons is for risk-aware consensual kink, right? So if you are in a position where you could be being choked, there's a high risk. There's high risks in quite a few kinks. There's low risks in other ones, but you always want to know what level of risk you're at. So there's an acronym RAC for risk aware consensual kink. You want to make sure that you're doing kink in a way that's safe, that's sane, that's consensual. So insane is where you're not listening and it is no longer becomes consensual. So it needs to be sane, safe, sane, and consensual. Consent is so important because there have been so many times where if consent isn't clear, then what ends up happening is you could get sued, go to jail, all kinds of things. Either, you're the person you're playing with could, get you in trouble, or maybe you feel like they crossed a boundary, so you're calling the cops on them. So you want to make sure everything is clear. Make sure that all parties know what the agreement is. And it's really important to be able to establish really clear boundaries. So what are your hard limits? What are your soft limits? And how do you know that? You might not know that until you're playing around, and then you need to use those words. So the most common safe words are those colors of the street lights, right? So red, yellow, green. And so red, stop, absolute hard stop. Yellow is like a bit of a hit in there, not really sure. Slow down, maybe check in more often. And green is go. And, sometimes your partner needs the go feedback as well, because the yeses are just as important. The yeses in terms of play don't necessarily always come out as the word yes or no, because in kink play, some of those no's are part of consensual non-consent, and they actually mean yes. So you need to get clear on what your safe words are. No is not a good safe word. No is a play word in kink. So you need to use things like the red, yellow, and green, or your own safe words to be really clear on what's acceptable. So yes, getting those like clear definitions down. We're going to talk more about that when we come back. You're listening to the Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is the Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight we are breaking from taboos and we are moving into the exploration of kink, and we are taking the necessary steps to do that. What a great time to do that, right? We're moving into a new year, whether you're listening now or in the future. Just consider this your new year. You could be listening to it in June. This is the start of a new time for you. And I think that it's always a great time when you're willing to be able to step into more of you, move out of the shame, move out of the blame, move out of guilt, move into joy, move into better communication with your partner, have exploration, have fun, have curiosity, have consent, have all those things. So in the last segment, we were talking about some safety things to look at. And, one of the main things is establishing really clear boundaries, having safe words, knowing that consent is important. So we talked about the different levels of safe, of risk, so you could have high risk or lower risk kink. So when you're starting out, you want to go with low risk activities, things like just putting on maybe a blindfold. That's a low risk kink. You could also do low risk kink that is, well, it all depends on the person. Some people have allergies, so it's hard to say. I was thinking more like food can be a really low risk kink, but if somebody has food allergies, then all of a sudden you die. So yeah, let's start with the blindfold. That's nice and easy to play with. And just even something as simple as low risk can be, using your hand for spanking, not getting into any paddles or anything like that right off the bat. And you want to discuss in advance, like, what are your yes, no's, and maybes. So I have a list on my website. If you go over to milicajelenic.com, and on there you can download my, oh, sorry, it's not my yes, no's, maybes, it's my do's, don'ts, maybes list. So if you can go grab my do's, don'ts, maybes list, there are some pretty vanilla things on there, but you can use it for a guideline to start, whether it's being a little bit kinky where it's like giving a blowjob in a park. Well, I don't recommend that. You could get caught and go to jail. So you didn't hear it here, but maybe it's in your own backyard and you like to be an exhibitionist. Okay, cool. Have fun with that. So, but that might be a hard no for one of the partners. So you got to know what your do's, don'ts, maybes are. Get both partners or all partners involved. If there's more than two of you, get all the partners involved to get really clear on your do's, don'ts, maybes. Share those lists, discuss the lists, and figure out what works for you. Because you're probably going to find that there are some things that are quite the opposite. Like some things will be a clear do for you, where they're a clear don't for your partner. You might find that things on that list you'd like to add to the list. So absolutely add to the list, because my list is pretty vanilla. It's for very beginner phase of getting back on track with relationships and inviting more intimacy back into your life. So definitely add things to the list and start slow. Like, you don't want to just go from never playing with kink to all of a sudden you're bound and gagged with a ball and you've got, burning fire on your genitalia while you're hovering above barking dogs. And, there's other things like giant hooks being stuck into your nipples. Like, that's hardcore. So maybe not that right off the bat, maybe something a little bit less risky, that's less life-threatening. So a blindfold. Start with the blindfold so that you can build trust and confidence with your partner too, that you'll know what you're, if you're safe. If you say, if you have the blindfold on and at some point you're like, I don't like having this blindfold on anymore, because even that can feel intimidating if you're new to that, and it can feel like you've lost control. So if you have like a red on that and you take off your blindfold, then you just do that. So you need to know that you're safe to be able to explore in your own time and in your own way that you need to explore. So one of the other things we want to look at through this exploration and getting really clear on the communication part is the contracts. And there are templates out there. If you can't find them, let me know. Connect with me through milicajelenic.com. Send me an email. There are contracts out there. I have several from my coaching courses that are kink contracts, so that you can fill in the blanks, and it'll help you outline things like the limits that you have, your do's, don'ts, maybes, what your expectations are of what you're going to receive, of what your partner is going to do. And also with all kink, you need to look at aftercare, because it's one thing to go, be spanked for an hour or two, but then after that, do you just walk away, or is there aftercare? Will you have check-ins with the person that you're having this kink exploration with? Will you have cuddle time? Will there be food? Will you be nurtured? There's a lot of care that's needed in order for these experiences to not only be safe, but for your nervous system to be able to be safe. So I'm talking physically safe, but also for your nervous system to be regulated again, so that you can walk out into the world and not be highly traumatized by the experience. So in some of the wording, you might want to just say, I've been curious about this, this, and this. Just get curious. You remember how I love to be curious. So write some of your curiosities down. Journal after each of your sessions in kink, and what did you like? What didn't you like? What works for you? And what do you want to try again in the future, maybe? And remember, you can always connect with me if you do have questions. If you're like, I have no idea where to start, just connect with me through milicajelenic.com. That's Milica.
Thank you for choosing to listen to The Pleasure Zone with with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. We'll return next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and tuned in.